Hello. Welcome to another episode of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. Each week we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season we're going to be focusing on horror subgenres and how they've changed over time. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks for listening. As we continue our journey through the development of the zombie subgenre, I think a quick recap is in order. So this season, we're kind of breaking it up into almost like mini seasons about different horror subgenres. We are midway through our mini season on zombie movies. So if you want to go back and listen to the previous two and get caught up, you can. If not, I'll give a quick recap that kind of brings us up to the movie that we're going to talk about today, which is 28 Days Later.
Oh, yeah.
So, last time on The Horrific, zombie movies started with zombies being a product of voodoo and were typically associated with the Caribbean islands. In 1968, Night of the Living Dead broke that mold and established the framework for what we generally think of when we think of zombie movies today. In 1985, The Return of the Living Dead mixed dark comedy and teenage pop culture with the classic formula and set the tone for where you could push the genre. I'm sure I'll offend a lot of people with this statement, but the 90s were pretty much a dry spell for the zombie genre. If you look across lists of the best zombie movies of the 90s, you're going to see a lot of sequels and a lot of movies that look like the writer and or director saw The Return of the Living Dead and thought, I can do that. Zombie movies were also, for the most part, box office and critical flops throughout the 90s. One thing outside the film industry, though, is really relevant to the discussion of zombies in popular culture is video games. In 1996, the video game Resident Evil brought zombie survival to the living room TVs in a new and more interactive way. The game series was wildly popular and was a big influence on gaming in general, as well as just to zombie-type gaming. Also in 1996, the arcade shooter The House of the Dead was released. This popular light gun game focused on more of the action and violence of zombie survival, but it brought it again into popular culture. So even though zombie movies weren't really at the forefront of pop culture at the time, they still had a strong presence in video games and were able to do new and innovative things in them. That all brings us to 2002, when a movie came along that completely reinvigorated zombie films. That movie was 28 Days Later. It combined a lot of fresh-feeling elements into a single package and presented zombies in a way that made them feel relevant again. After 28 Days Later, zombie movies started making money again, and you started seeing tons of big blockbuster films, as well as beloved comedies and even some musicals featuring zombies. The Walking Dead cashed in on this, and zombies have generally enjoyed a prominent place in American culture since this British movie came along and reanimated them.
So, you're going to sit there, and you're going to tell me, Night of the Day of the Dawn of the Son of the Bride of the Return of the Terror was a bad zombie movie from 1991?
I'm going to sit here and tell you that it wasn't influential on the genre.
I was like, there's no way there wasn't one good one. I was looking, I was like, what the hell is Night of the Day of the Dawn of the Son of the Bride of the Return of the Terror?
No, as I was kind of preparing for this season and working on like the list of movies, I was like, man, we really have a big gap between 1985 and 2002. Surely there was something going on there. And the more that I looked at it, like anytime you would search for like 90s zombie movies, it's not great movies on a listicle, or it is an article talking about how there were basically no influential 90s zombie movies.
I love it.
Yeah. But I think that that's an important thing to understand. I mean, like, you know, looking back over the course of it, I think 28 Days Later really gets lumped in with a lot of the movies that came shortly after. But it's easy to lose sight of how influential and what a big deal it was for the genre in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. This 100% game changer. I think this kind of laid the groundwork for 75% of zombie movies that came out since.
And even just, I feel like kind of getting zombies back into pop culture, like making it a thing people were interested in and talking about, as far as movies go. Because I do think that, in my mind, historically, it always just kind of came out of nowhere. It was like, yeah, in the 80s, they overdid it. By the 90s, people were over it. And then this like really unique movie came along and like brought it back. But I think it's wrong to ignore like the Resident Evil series and the way that like video game zombies were getting to be really popular leading up to this, because I think that some of the stuff that those games did by having like the zombie bosses with like the different kind of more creative attributes and stuff kind of helped, I guess, I can't really think of a new way to say like resurrected the genre, breathed new life into the genre, reanimated the genre that's not like a zombie pun. I'm not doing that on purpose. I just can't think of a better way of saying it.
I would just say erect.
Absolutely, you would.
You're damn right I would. Yeah, I think that here's the thing too, in rewatching this film, every time I do this, it's weird to me because I feel like it is a very 2000s film, if that makes any sense. Like it's just very early 2000s, except for like, I guess above it is where I'm kind of getting at from, it's going to be difficult. This podcast is going to be difficult being such a fan of a film.
Yeah.
But I know, like you're saying with video games, that's obviously, Resident Evil. I think comic books definitely huge, like, similar with shortly after, what was it, like 4 years later, that's when The Walking Dead, like the TV show came out. And I feel like that was around the new zombie craze that came out 2006-ish.
Yes, absolutely. Era. I think that you can very much draw a very straight line from, I guess stepping back, we talked about how Night of the Living Dead can really be seen as like the seed that all the rest of the zombie movies from the 80s, 70s and 80s really like sprung from. And then there were a few things along the way that kind of like got added to the canon of what zombies were. And so you have like this tree growing out and, some branches are bigger than the others. And then it was like a bunch of those just kind of died off. And then it was like new life sprung from 28 Days Later. And then you see like these much bigger branches even kind of coming out of that, because I think this, like the cultural success of The Walking Dead was on just such a massive scale compared to anything that had come before.
Yeah. And I think a really prime example of that is, 28 Days Later to 28 Weeks Later. Although, I like 28 Weeks Later. It's just, there's just night and day. For me, it's night and day difference. Like watching 28 Weeks Later is just like, just another zombie horror film at this point for me. Watching 28 Days Later, it definitely, you could just tell that there's just something different about it, if it's the writing or the making, whatever the case is. But like, I definitely think there are times, and we've talked about this, it's like what makes something viral, in movies that can definitely help with, the smaller movies like Evil Dead or whatever. But I think there was just something like just the timing, like you were saying, the period of the 90s wasn't that great. Even 85 wasn't the best, but you just had this period and all of a sudden this new piece kind of comes out and it's almost like refined horror.
Yeah, well, I think something that we're starting to see, and I guess we can kind of track this through the other subgenres, is that like the most influential movies are doing interesting things from a horror perspective in that subgenre, but also just interesting things from like a movie making perspective. Because I think that Night of the Living Dead, you could have taken the zombies out of it, completely out of the conversation, and there were a lot of things that you could talk about with that movie that made it interesting at the time. It was like the independent film. It was kind of low budget. It was, an African American in a prominent role in a movie, like, which was, not a common thing at the time. Like it did some controversial things even outside of like the story elements about zombies.
Yeah.
That made it stand alone as a work of film. And then when you add this like concept of like the zombies that were an idea that Romero and Rousseau had been, sort of writing and culminating on for years. And now they find this like right environment at the right time with the right movie making techniques. And it becomes this like pop culture phenomenon.
Yeah.
I think that 28 Days Later obviously has a lot of social commentary in it as well. And then, being like post 9/11, having it feel like very apocalyptic, having it be, sort of at this time when it felt like there was a lot of like global upheaval and such, having this movie that felt like apocalyptic, but also like very much an independent film with really like creative, like this was the first movie I ever watched where I was like, oh, the directing made this a lot better. Like the camera angles and the colors and the way they used music to underthink. Like when this movie first came out, it blew my mind because of how it was just as a work of film on top of being like a really interesting, well done zombie horror movie.
Yeah. 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 It definitely comes from experience. I think, Daniel Boyle, Train Spotting is one of my favorite films that he's done. After 28 Days Later, but he's done like Slumdog Millionaire, 127 Hours. So I think it definitely helps having some sort of experienced, director too.
Yeah. So 28 Days Later. Obviously, this is going to be a real positive review, but I will go ahead and do the introduction. And then, do you have fun facts for this one?
Yes.
Excellent. So after that, we will get into the rage virus infused details.
I'll allow it.
Wasn't my best work, but whatever. In 2002, Fox Searchlight Pictures brought us 28 Days Later, a British zombie horror film starring Cillian Murphy and directed by Danny Boyle. This movie tells the story of a man who wakes up from a coma to find himself 1 month into a zombie apocalypse in London. He bands together with fellow survivors on a cross-country trip in a search for refuge. Along the way, they learn the hard way that uninfected doesn't mean safe. 28 Days Later was made on a budget of about $8 million and made about $86 million at the box office. It's currently basically non-existent on streaming services, but it's totally worth buying if you haven't already, so just go for it. What did you learn about this movie?
I learned that Windows PCs can't play Blu-rays unless you have some certain encoding thing installed. I just like to get that off my chest.
Did you install said encoding?
It doesn't work. It's bullshit. How can you sell a PC with a Blu-ray player and then not have a goddamn application that works with Blu-ray players? Sorry.
Got him.
I'm sorry. I was like legit getting worked up when this was because I was like, oh fuck it, I'll just buy it electronic. Just buy it on Apple or Amazon. Can't even do that. Oh, sorry. I was getting
That's what was really surprising to me is it wasn't like you couldn't just stream it. It was like you couldn't even buy it digitally.
Yeah. So this movie was actually, so the writer, Alex Garland, said the original inspiration for this was the Day of the Triffids.
Triffids. Day of the Triffids. Yeah. Classic sci-fi movie.
Yeah, from 1963. About a tale of species of plants that start to take over the world. Which I respect that. Yeah. One of the things too with the zombies, so like what we talk about with them being into, it's the rage virus, which is what's their infection. What Danny Boyle did was he ended up casting zombies as or that were athletes. Make it look a little bit more realistic. You think about it, you got Ezekiel Elliott running at you. It's gonna be a little bit more intimidating than old fat Bryce here. You know what I mean?
Well, Ezekiel Elliott a few years ago, maybe.
I mean, he'd fumble you. So
I saw him get laid out on TV just a few days ago
as a center.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those were the two facts that I wanted to add to this. If you listen to our previous episode, there's a few more there.
So I am really glad you brought up the Day of the Triffids thing. Something I was reading about this was that the people who made the movie were not like gung-ho on, I just want to make a zombie movie. It was, I like the idea of this sort of apocalypse scenario, and, you know, I like Night of the Living Dead. And so it was kind of this like combination of previous works and then ideas for ways that they had to make the zombies more intense. And that really, reading about it, made me think all the way back to, you know, what we talked about with the making of Night of the Living Dead, where really one of the big influences there was not, I want to make a zombie movie. It was, I want to make a movie that feels like I Am Legend, but like at the beginning of the outbreak. And then Russo and Romero had, you know, sort of been working on this idea for these, you know, living dead people. And that just kind of fit into it. And then what came out was this like kind of unique, relevant, exciting feeling thing that had a sense of novelty to it. And so I feel like there are some similar parallels here to where, you know, you kind of take these influences along with some original ideas and you make a new thing that just kind of changes the game.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. The thing too, wanted to clarify, Alex Garland was the one who wrote the screenplay. I may have missaid that, but, yeah, I mean, I think that's like, I think if you're gonna take a genre, you know, like zombies, or I guess any genre if you want to think about it, but like, so I wonder if it's like with music where, you know, they say you don't take like 100 items from one musician, you take one item from 100 musicians as like your influence, like what do you want to mold your sound around? You could definitely run into, what's that band that stole Led Zeppelin's sound? They're young kids from Michigan. It doesn't matter. But like, you don't want to do that because it's like, then you're just compared to, you know, Led Zeppelin, and like, they got their own problems still in music. So why would you want to steal theirs? I feel like zombies is I feel like horror films can definitely be similar. We're almost like benefiting from being around as long as we have, because you can just pull influences, and it doesn't, what we kind of are learning is like, oh, it doesn't have to be about zombies to get the influence. And I know that's really pretty common knowledge, but like, I just like the fact that it's not just based off of, you know, they were like, well, we're not just going to make this based off of the Day of the Triffids. We're going to also off of some 70s zombie films, or, you know, like, it's just a combo. Otherwise you're just going to make a carbon copy.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing we see is kind of a repeating cycle, is where you have this idea of like a movie that comes out and does something popular, and then a bunch of movies come out that kind of copy it, and then it's almost like it just gets like rinsed and repeated to the point that people aren't interested anymore.
Right.
Until another movie comes along and does something exciting and interesting again. Yeah. And I think this is one of those movies that came along and did something exciting and interesting.
100%.
One thing that has always really stood out to me about this one was the soundtrack.
Yeah.
I feel like the music really fits the scenes well, but it's also just very unique. Like, it is not a typical Hollywood movie soundtrack at all. And that's one of the things that has kind of stood out to me. Like, when I think back on this movie about the things that I really liked about it, the music is always one of them.
Yeah. You know, it's actually kind of funny you say that, because when I was trying to find this movie online, all I could find was the soundtrack over and over. Oh, and then finally I was like, I'm just going to give this damn thing a listen. I know it's good, so might as well. I'd listen to the whole thing. I feel like it's difficult to talk about music within horror or anything being a musician, because it's like, I feel like I'm probably more opinionated about music than anything else. Mm-hmm. But the dynamic that the music added to the film was just, I don't know how you can recreate it. Yeah. You know, a lot of instrumental, you know, music, but it's just like the intensity. It's almost like they had to like they were watching the film and writing at the same time. You know, like, so they knew exactly what was going on. And that might be how it goes. I don't know. I don't care to know. But it just might be how it is, you know, but it just seemed like that's the case, where it kind of played in to the film really well.
Yeah, and I think that one thing, you know, this movie has kind of the cadence that we talk about with a lot of horror movies, where you have like a really intense scene, and then you have a scene that's meant to kind of like make you let your guard down. And I think the music really played a big part in that, in like kind of guiding you how subconsciously on how you should be feeling at the moment. So that then when like the scary thing happens again, it like catches you by surprise again. And that's part, like, you know, with horror movies, it's really hard to make a movie like super intense and terrifying for, you know, an hour and a half. So what a lot of movies do, and a lot of movies that are really effective do, is to sort of slightly increase the horror and to like reset that feeling or reset that tone as the movie goes along, so that it can find new ways to like scare you or draw you back in. And I think that this movie does a really good job of kind of managing that cadence of the intensity throughout the film.
Yeah, so it's just another way. I feel like it's just another way to kind of relieve the tension that you have. Yeah, 100%. Sometimes it's a joke, sometimes it's music, but as long as you get it, it's a nice little deep breath that you can take.
Yeah, a lot of the things about how this movie were made, like, I mean, like I said, the camera work, the soundtrack, lots of it was just great. But I think one thing that also deserves to be talked about in terms of like how was this movie influential would be the way the zombies were portrayed. And I know that you are very excited about that piece in particular. Would you like to talk about it some?
Freaking love zombies, man.
You love the 28 Days Later fast, intense zombies.
Yes, you're damn right. Welcome to the age of rage, people. You like that?
I love that.
Yeah, that's good, huh? Yeah, so this is... there's like a combo with this, right? So you have a new style of zombies. The fast ones that ain't, you know, I assume they're all angry, but, you know, just they're out for blood. You have that piece. But you also have, you know, the infection part, like how they were infected with the rage virus. So this is like we've talked about with the season, we were talking with, you know, the different styles of how people become zombies. We talked in Night of the Living Dead. Was it a satellite or something like that? I think that was the case. Or was that Return of the Living Dead?
Sorry, the satellite was Night of the Living Dead.
Okay. Yeah, so it was satellite, Night of the Living Dead. Oh, yeah, because it was the toxic in...
the army experiment.
Yeah. In Return of the Living Dead. This one, it's kind of like a combo. It's a virus. I feel like this is one of the more realistic approaches to it. I don't think a satellite or toxic, whatever, can do that. I feel like this is relatively legitimate. Here's the thing I think is also kind of interesting is I think that the way that they put this together, like, it kind of makes sense. I don't know if it would be that believable. Already believing in zombies, you know, but I don't know if it could be that believable that something like rage, the very rage virus or the age of rage that we're in, could have came from anything other than a virus type disease. I personally feel like
well, it's kind of like what is scientifically plausible in 2002. Like in 2002, we knew a lot more about space and about radiation and stuff like that. And so I think the one area where it's like the general population knows a decent amount about how some of this stuff works, at least at a functional level. And so by introducing the idea of a virus, everyone's like, well, yeah, that's a thing that happens. This could be real.
And, you know, the cool thing that kind of ties it all together is, you know, how it's transmitted too. I mean, this is similar through, you know, bodily fluids, like blood or saliva. I think it was saying like the virus takes over like the host within like 10 to 20 seconds. That was another thing you kind of have to appreciate. You don't have to wait. The thing that I was kind of complaining about, like, there's always going to be someone in the basement that's been bit, that's hiding it, you know. That's just always the thing. Like this one, it's like you don't really have time to hide it. Like you should be running before, like, as soon as you see that there's something sketchy going on. Like there's the difference between those two. I don't know. I think for me it was just like the intensity that zombie films kind of needed that's how you can provide it. And I definitely understand. Well, it's not like this film also doesn't have social commentaries with it too, and dealing with trauma and all that kind of thing that Night of the Living Dead definitely had too. But God, just the anger that's involved with the zombies just makes it even more intense.
Yes.
Just from the point of view of like, you see someone walking slow at you saying, I'm gonna eat your brains, and you're like, I'll just keep walking. Simple.
Right. Yeah.
You see someone running at you with like bloody eyes and like, teeth and fingers messed up, then by God, I'm getting out.
Yeah. Well, and I think the best word to sum up the style of zombies in this movie is intense. It's just all the way around, every way you look at it, the zombies in 28 Days Later are way more intense than the zombies that I remember seeing in any movie before it. Mm-hmm. And that adds just such a sense of tension and danger and anxiety and everything else that works well in a horror movie, which is awesome. And another thing that I feel like the movie did really well that kind of like pulls you in and almost makes you like feel that danger more, or that intensity more, is that, a lot like Night of the Living Dead, this movie had a relatively small number of characters that you spent any time with. And so like the setting and the world was much bigger, and they traveled all over and they encountered these different locations and environments, which is very different than Night of the Living Dead. You had all of the soldiers in the house, but most of them didn't really get much character development. They kind of just were what they were. So really you're focused on the small group of main characters who find themselves in all of these different situations. And I think that like their fear and their anxiety is a big part of the movie. And even like when they're traveling, there's that part where Jim has the dream about like waking up and all the other survivors have abandoned him and he's completely alone in the meadow. And like, why did they include that other than just to make him a very real person with very real fears, mm-hmm. who then you resonate with the more times he gets put into these like terrible situations. And so that even to me was a big part of like spending time making you care about the characters who find themselves in these very intense situations is really important to a horror movie pulling off what it wants to pull off.
Yeah.
And I feel like this movie just did like a really good job of that.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing too, like about that virus is about the virus that they have. I remember reading up on was saying that, it's caused by the exposure to like violence and like military oppression, which is like this obvious social kind of piece of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like I feel like that's just hand in hand. Like you could see that from, I don't want to say like the beginning of zombies, because we saw with White Zombie a little bit different, but like 28 Days or Night of the Living Dead, like definitely started a social commentary there. Like this is just added on. I just like how they added that piece in, I guess. It's even if it's like a tip of the hat to, the OGs, I feel like you got to do that from time to time.
Yeah. Yeah. And the idea that like, in a crisis type situation, people resort to depravity and become just as dangerous as the external forces that are creating the danger around you. Right. Like, I think that I've heard a lot of, or I've read a few things that have talked about how this movie has like spiked in popularity when certain other events have happened. Mm-hmm. Like apparently it got just like a ridiculous number of streams during COVID, and like the COVID lockdowns or stay at home orders or whatever you want to call them. And then also like, post Hurricane Katrina, there was like an uptick in like this movie being part of the popular discourse. And I think that it really did kind of capture that feeling of being people in a world where you've kind of lost control and where there's external danger, which it feels like has kind of happened on like a larger scale in the 2000s. And I think that's just because like media makes it more readily available and everybody knows what everybody else is going through in a way that they didn't before. But it's interesting. It really does kind of feel like it exercises a lot of social fears, I guess.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's like with zombies, the thing that terrifies you the most really is the other people, not necessarily the zombies.
Yeah, and I feel like the whole like journey of, zombie apocalypse has broken out. We're a small band of survivors who found each other. Now we heard a random radio broadcast that there might be safety somewhere. Now we have to travel a long way to get to that place and, avoid the zombies along the way. But we don't know what we'll find when we get there is a pretty standard like zombie staple that, in any of the movies that we've watched didn't happen really before this one, but is a thing that's kind of a central like plot device for a lot of the movies that came after.
Yeah.
And I don't know for sure that this one, sort of did that for the first time, but I can't think of examples of it happening sooner.
Yeah. One thing too, I totally meant to mention, and then I remember mentioning September 11th before, since it came out after that, right after. One of the scenes where they're kind of celebrating, it's like the piece that you were talking about just a bit ago about the celebration, or like the way they kind of interact with each other. One of the celebrations actually happened on the day of September 11th. Granted, this was filmed not in America, so not nearly as crazy, but I think that had to have played some certain role to make what they were enjoying actually enjoyable, if that makes sense. So like there's something really crazy going on in the United States, and thankful that we could sit here and enjoy this food kind of piece to it. So that, not necessarily like movie magic, and I'm sure everyone would wish that didn't happen, but one of the ways that made it a little bit more genuine, I guess.
So you're talking about just kind of the general idea of like this larger, scary, uncontrollable thing has happened, and that almost like focuses us on just appreciating where we are and what we have in the moment.
For the actors who are acting in that scene, the day of, yep, 100%, yeah. Which, I mean, I feel like that's the same feeling that they were having in the actual film.
Oh yeah,
so sure. It's like
when they're in the grocery
super
store.
Genuine. Yeah. This is the scene right after the grocery store where they're kind of eating in the field where he wakes up. Yeah. Super intense. I couldn't imagine.
Yeah. Two quick scenes I want to talk about.
Mm.
One is when they roll up on the sort of the blockade outside the army base, and there's like all those abandoned military vehicles and like guard shacks and gates and stuff. And Frank looks up and the blood from the zombie upstairs drips down onto him. And then he starts turning and he like pushes his daughter away and he's starting to transform. And I think his acting there is just perfect. And then like Jim is preparing to like fight him, but then all of a sudden he just starts getting shot from all around. And there's that blood splatter onto the camera lens. And I know that is a thing that happens all the time, but this movie was the first time I ever saw that, and it blew my mind.
Yeah.
Like the idea of, it's like I'm right there. Like it's like splashing in my face, right. It was just such a crazy thing to me. And I would be really interested to hear if any viewers know of listeners know of an earlier example of that happening in a movie, because that's something I really, really like, but I don't know where it started.
Yeah. 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 It's like the depth. It's almost like the fourth wall kind of thing.
Yeah.
Putting you in that place. And like you're saying, I mean, I think, Brendan Gleeson, who plays Frank, like, just phenomenal actor. Like he's the stuff he's been in is just like, oh my God. But like that scene specifically, you also feel for it because he's getting shot up as he's saying like, get back, like trying to protect Jim, Selena, and Hannah. And immediately just like putting yourself in like Hannah's shoes, like she's having to deal with like, oh, my dad's turning into this zombie that's going to try to kill us, to dead, so like there was almost like two trauma situations happening at the same time. And
again, like you feel for her in that moment, because like the relationship between her and her dad is like one of the things that the movie has spent time like developing, and so again, the very much like character driven, like this is the people that were making you care about having to deal with this, big, horrific situation.
Yeah.
I think is key to what you see in a lot of zombie movies moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other scene I wanted to talk about was just that whole ending sequence where after they take Cillian Murphy out to execute him and he gets away, and then he basically is just like, all right, no more rules. Like he basically, and ends up completely covered in blood. He lets the zombie that they're observing inside loose, and then it starts attacking people. It's raining, and he comes through the window at one point completely covered in blood, and he's like indistinguishable from a zombie. And in that moment, you're like cheering for him and for the other zombies. Like you're cheering against the army people who have established themselves as like the worst people in the movie because they're not infected, but they're still choosing to be assholes.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be like that.
But just that, and I know we've talked about this a million times before, but that whole idea of like when the hunted becomes the hunter, like when the tables get turned, when the script gets flipped, and you see someone kind of become almost more than themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's a thing that I think is really, really powerful in movies. And the fact that they did it here, but it wasn't just like, okay, just kidding, Michael Myers isn't going to beat me up this time because I'm really determined now and I wasn't last time for some reason. It's like, no, I am taking the side of the zombies against these people that don't deserve to survive. And that just something about that was just so like, I don't know, empowering or like intense, that I thought it was added a really cool element to the movie.
Yeah. I think that definitely plays a part in the acting pieces too. Cause like 100% would want to punch those guys in the face.
Yep.
If I saw, I think something that's also really, really cool about the whole ending, early on with Jim and Selena, like it was straight up like, hey, are you bit? Because like she's fixing to kill you. Like she was, it was not mess around. But when he comes back up, there's that hesitation that she didn't have before. Yeah, so like that was her kind of changing, him kind of, him obviously changing too. But like, it was, I think that if you have that much detail into to a film, it'd be really difficult to not be successful.
Yeah.
Like I just don't know how that could be the case because no, this movie's obviously not perfect. There were definitely a few blunders that kind of happened in it, but it doesn't matter. Like, if you can convey that over, even with a slight like hesitation, without killing, without like announcing it to the world of what was happening, yeah, that's good. That's good writing. That's good acting. That's good filmmaking. So.
Yeah, definitely. And so, obviously the results speak for themselves with this one. It kind of sparked, a decade and a half of a huge zombie resurgence in the US and other places. And it really, I think it was a direct influence, like even from like the opening premise of like the guy in the coma that wakes up in the hospital and stuff, like how many times has that been copied at this point?
Yeah.
And it's cool. I think this movie has like a strong legacy, but still definitely holds up as a super unique, well-made, good movie that took the whole genre in an exciting new direction.
Yeah, that added to like immediately added to the history of zombies. Like you can't talk about the history of zombies without talking about this film. Like I just don't know how you could.
Faux show. Well, I mean, you could do anything poorly, I guess.
Bastards.
You can phone in any job.
That's true.
Yeah. So yeah, super exciting. I really enjoyed going back and revisiting this one. Next week we're going to be back and focus on non-US zombie movies. And it feels weird to say that because this was not a US zombie movie either, but sort of the culture or the development of zombie films outside of the English speaking world is what we'll be focused on next time. So
in the combination of other genres too. with horror with
Oh
zombies.
yes, yeah. I get what you're saying. Yes, other like filmmaking techniques and things too that kind of fit into that, and how we've seen some creativity there, which is cool.
Yeah.
So, yep. Join us next time, and we will continue on this adventure. And I know we had talked about doing a 5-episode like mini season. You just can't contain zombie horror movies to 5 episodes.
Yeah.
Especially when there's some really exciting things going on right now. So we're going to do 6. So next week, we're going to be back. Week after that, we're going to be back. And then we're going to be back doing something totally different.
The week after.
Yeah.
But then we'll be back to zombies the week after. No, I'm just kidding.
The week after, the day after, the dawn of the day after the Triffids.
Yes. That's the last one.
Yeah. And then we're going to do an episode about Greta Van Fleet.
Oh, that's it. Yeah.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.